Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Manning and I'm Executive Director of ASPI. Our purpose here is to educate individuals about options regarding active surveillance, which is not a treatment, but a management plan. I would like to remind everyone that we are not anti-treatment, but anti-unnecessary treatment. A couple quick housekeeping measures. We're going to hold all questions until after the speaker. You can submit questions in the chat box, which we will try to address after he has had his speech. At that time, you can also click the raise hand button from the bottom of your Zoom window toolbar. And if there's time, we'll try to call on you. Please keep yourself muted during the meeting. The speaker presenting here today is generously donating his time, so we want to be respectful of that. We are not here to dispense with any medical advice. Nothing said during this meeting by our speaker, ASPI, or the audience should take the place of your consultations with your medical professionals. Also, you do not need to feverishly take notes during the talk, as this meeting is being recorded, will be available on our website in approximately 1 week, and you will get an email notifying you when it's ready. Also, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you will automatically be notified when a new video is posted. The last item is watching the meeting. If you'll notice in the upper right corner of your Zoom window, there's a button that says View. When you click that, you can switch between the gallery view, which is everyone, or you can focus on the speaker. We highly recommend selecting speaker, which helps you focus on the topic at hand versus what someone in the audience is having for lunch. So without further ado, we'll have a quick few words from Mark Lichty, our chairman, who will then turn the meeting over to Howard Wolinsky, the organizer of this meeting. So relax, enjoy the meeting, and I hope you leave a little bit smarter. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Bill. And I wanted to remind you all too, if you click on the three buttons near your picture, on the top of your picture, you can give us the location that you're calling in from. It would be good for us to know that. And I'm going to speak to you here from the heart because I had a stroke, lost part of my vision, so I can't read my notes anyway. But you know what we try to do here with ASPI is to create a sanctuary, a place where you can be at peace with the fact that you may have been diagnosed with prostate cancer. We're not into anxious surveillance, we're into active surveillance. And in fact, 3 of our board members have transitioned very smoothly into treatment. As Bill said, we are not at all anti-treatment. We encourage it when you need treatment. But with the progress around prostate cancer, the progress around monitoring prostate cancer, you don't have to have anxiety anymore. You can be at peace with it. And I would say that our board has pretty much reached a place of peaceful vigilance, which is what we all strive for. I was just I'm going to introduce Howard Wolinsky now, and Howard just did a wonderful piece that I'm going to take this opportunity to recommend. He has a newsletter called The Active Surveiller. And if you haven't signed up for the Active Surveiller, please do. The reason that that's particularly important now is that he just did a wonderful article on Kramer, one of the characters, or on Seinfeld. One of the characters in that, Kramer, was recently diagnosed with prostate cancer, but unfortunately did not do what we had hoped he would do in terms of promoting what we promote, and that is finding a place of peace with prostate cancer. Anyway, I wanted to recommend Howard's newsletter to you, and thank you, Howard, again for finding Gabe, and we welcome Gabe, and you're on, Howard. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark, and welcome everybody. Now, Gabe Canales and I have a lot in common. We both were diagnosed young with prostate cancer. For me, I was 62. Average age is about 68. Gabe was young too, but when I say young, I mean really young. He was 35 years old. And it was a wake-up call for him. In fact, he wrote a book about it called Unexpected Diagnosis. And you don't expect a diagnosis of prostate cancer in young men like that, but it happens. It can even happen to teenage boys. And generally what it means is a more aggressive disease and lower survival rates. Fortunately, Gabe was diagnosed with Gleason 6, low-risk prostate cancer. And it was a wake-up call for him. He started a charity called Blue Cures, and with the goal of telling younger men about the risks of prostate cancer. But he discovered some issues, which I'm sure he'll describe today. And he broadened his program and his campaign to healthcare for younger men. So, and as Gabe says, his message is not just for the younger men, but also the older men. We have children and grandchildren who would benefit from this. So Gabe, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Howard. And I appreciate this opportunity to share my story and my experiences. Again, my name is Gabe Canales. And in 2010, at age 35, I was feeling a little bit sluggish. And I was working a lot. I owned a marketing and public relations agency. And I was just nonstop, going from one event to another and really focused on my clients and growing their businesses. And I would say probably sleeping about 3 to 4 hours a night. But I went to a primary care physician just to get myself checked out. And the time I had high LDL cholesterol, my blood pressure was high, and my physician told me that I also had low testosterone. And he encouraged me to go to a urologist and just get it checked out. But he assured me that I was probably, that I was fine. So I went to a urologist at Baylor College of Medicine, Dr. Larry Lipschultz. And Dr. Lipschultz confirmed I had low testosterone and put me on a supplement called Testum. And I rubbed it on my shoulders to get my testosterone boosted. About a week and a half later, his physician's assistant called me and said he kept talking about a PSA. And I was half listening, and the first thing I thought of was a public service announcement that the Baylor Urology Group wanted to hire my company to produce a public service announcement for them. And that was where I was going with him. And then when he explained that he kept talking about my high PSA number, I asked him to explain it a little bit more in detail. I didn't know at age 35 what a PSA was. I didn't even know the function of my prostate. And there I was with a graduate school education, and I just didn't know anything about my own health, my own anatomy in that way. So he encouraged me to go back and get another PSA. I called my dad, and I told my dad what the physician's assistant encouraged me to do. And my dad said, "They're full of shit. They're just trying to build the insurance company. I wouldn't go back." And so the PA called me again and encouraged me to, really get another PSA test. It could really make a difference. So I eventually went back, and my numbers went up more. And he asked me to do a biopsy. And when he told me what that would entail, I said, "Nope, I'm not going to do that." And it was only because he said that it would just be a pinch and I could do it during my lunch hour that I decided to do it. And it wasn't a pinch, and it was an incredibly excruciatingly painful experience. And so about a week later, I was heading out the door to go to the gym, and I received a call from my urologist, and he said, "I have some good news and I have some bad news. Bad news is you have cancer. The good news is you'll be fine." And when you hear those words, "you have cancer," everything stops. And the first question that I had was, am I going to die? I had a some friends that had been diagnosed that year with cancer, and two of them would pass away that year. So I immediately had this fear in me, and I'd never thought about anything like that before. And I don't have a family history of cancer. I don't have a family history of any kind of a issue like that. So I went back to my urologist and set up a meeting to see a Dr. Dov Cadman at Baylor College of Medicine. And he had encouraged me to get it removed. He said that would take care of the problem. And said, so, I said, okay, when do I do it? That was my initial thinking. If I get rid of my prostate, that's going to solve the issue. But I asked him, what are the side effects? And he said some incontinence and possibly some erectile dysfunction. And as soon as he said that, I said, well, wait a second, let me think about that a little bit. So I went and got a second opinion at MD Anderson Cancer Center. And that urologist, Pisters, he said, you have an early stage prostate cancer. We can put you on active surveillance where you will have annual biopsies and quarterly PSAs, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. Well, that was really confusing because on the one hand, one doctor said, get it removed. The other doctor said, you can not worry about it, just watch it. So I went back to my urologist, Dr. Lipschultz, and I said, what do I do? And he said, if you have the resources, I would go see who I think is the world's best in New York City, named Dr. Peter Scardino. He's the chair at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So I decided to schedule that appointment. And I scheduled another one with Dr. Aaron Katz, who was the head of the Center of Holistic Urology at Columbia Presbyterian. And before I flew up there, I read their books. And one of the things that really stuck out with Dr. Scardino's book was this passage where he says that factors that show promise as possibly preventing prostate cancer are a low-fat diet and an exercise program. But he said none of these has demonstrated the ability to change the course of the disease once it has been established. Okay, again, this is back in 2010 when I read this. So I hadn't really thought about that, preventing prostate cancer. But then I read Dr. Aaron Katz's book. And in Dr. Aaron Katz's book, what really stuck out was where he said that guys who change their diet and their lifestyle that are on my active holistic surveillance program, some of whom on repeat biopsy were found to have no cancer. And that really got me. And I said, wait, what? So then the risk factors that he included in his book that for men with prostate cancer over age 50, which I wasn't, being African-American, I wasn't, having a family history of prostate cancer, that wasn't me. But he said one risk factor that we have more control over is eating a diet high in fat from meats and dairy products. Well, that was me. I grew up eating a lot of red meat and drinking a lot of dairy. So I flew up to New York City and I met with Dr. Scardino, had a bunch of tests, and he said, look, you could live 20, 30 years and this does nothing. And I'm going to encourage you to go on active surveillance. And so then I went to see Dr. Aaron Katz. And the first question that he asked me is, what is your diet? And I said, I'm from Texas. I'm a meat and potatoes guy. He says, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I told him, I eat a lot of hamburgers, a lot of tacos. I eat a lot of barbecue. He asked me how often how many hours a night do you sleep? I said 3 or 4. He asked all about my lifestyle habits. And he also asked me, do you eat any vegetables? Do you eat any fiber? I said, no. And I was proud about that. I don't eat any greens. I don't eat any vegetables. And he was asking questions about my family history of disease. And though I have no family history of prostate cancer, I do have a family history of obesity, high blood pressure, high LDL, heart attack, death from heart disease, stroke, diabetes. So he said that though I have no family history of prostate cancer, I do have a family history of those other lifestyle-driven diseases. And he said that that is what he believed was the reason why I had prostate cancer at such a young age. See, I didn't have symptoms. That's not why they found that I had a high PSA at first. Remember, it was that my testosterone levels were low, and that's why I went and got tested, and that's what led to all this. So he was telling me, because I'd read his book, and I said that you actually have in your book about reversing prostate cancer, or that on repeat biopsy, some showed that they didn't even have cancer. I said, that kind of gives me hope, whereas I didn't have any before. And he was very confident. And he says, if you drastically change your diet and your lifestyle, you can slow the progression of the disease. I can't promise that it'll be gone, but you can slow the progression of the disease. So I liked that, because rather than just watching, I could actually do something about it. And so I came back to Houston, and I was doing some research on the internet, and there was a group out in Washington, D.C. that was having a prostate cancer summit. And they flew me out. They learned that I had been diagnosed at a young age. They wanted to involve me in this summit. And I was really, really excited about it. I flew out there to learn about advocacy, to see what I could do to make a difference. But one of the things that really stuck out was they had all these little breakout sessions, and not one of them could I relate to. There wasn't one on active surveillance. There wasn't one about nutrition or lifestyle interventions to slow the progression of the disease. And so I started doubting what I had just learned from that doctor in New York City, from Dr. Katz. And it wasn't till a chance meeting that I ran into Michael Milken, because the Prostate Cancer Foundation was also having something else was going on up there. So I was up there. Zero, the prostate cancer organization, had flown me over there. I ran into Michael Milken in the hallway. I told him about my experience up to that point, and the physician that I had met, the urologist I met in New York, who was telling me about diet. And Michael Milken was all about it. And he was also telling me that diet can make such a huge difference in the progression of the disease. And so I then, one of the things that really got me at the time was I was one of the only people that had flown to DC for this prostate cancer summit whose local congressperson wouldn't meet with me. All the others got to meet with their local, with their legislator. And it kind of pissed me off. I mean, John Culberson, and I even went there to his office because I was friendly with another congressman who my folks knew. He said, just walk in their office and tell them why you're there and that you want to meet with him. And they just wouldn't give me the time. So it wasn't till I got back to Houston. It was just like this fire was lighting up inside me. I want to do something. I have this. I didn't know anything about it, but I want younger men to also know about it. When I say younger, I want guys in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, because when I shared my diagnosis with my buddies, no one in their 20s, no one in their 30s, a few people knew, only because their grandfathers had it. But no one knew anything about their prostates or any kind of health literacy. So I decided I wanted to raise awareness. That was my whole focus at the time, was I just want to raise awareness of the disease. And I had, for my clients, I'd gotten them international media, I had gotten them national media, local media. So I always say that if you want to be an advocate, do what you can, and especially lean into what you know. Just like Howard Wolinsky, as his background as a medical journalist, he uses that in his advocacy. And I thought, well, I know marketing and public relations pretty well. Let me see how I can get some media to raise awareness. And so the first thing I did was contact CBS, a reporter that I knew, and he did a story on my early diagnosis at 35. And I remember a few days later being at the gym, and a guy came up to me and he said that he saw me on the news. And he says, I'm 26 years old. Should I get that PSA test? And I didn't know quite what to say, because that year also, I'd read up to that point all the controversy, so much controversy surrounding the PSA. And I was like, it's 26. I don't actually know what to tell him. And that's when around that time, a friend of mine introduced me to the then president of MD Anderson Cancer Center, Dr. John Mendelsohn. And Dr. Mendelsohn encouraged me to read a book called Anti-Cancer by Dr. David Servan-Schreiber. And he says it's the reason why they also decided to start the Department of Integrative Medicine at MD Anderson. And Dr. Mendelsohn was just so surprised that there was even talk of me having my prostate removed. And he said, there's so much that you can do. And I want you to read that book, Anti-Cancer, because you'll feel more empowered about what you can do in your life to improve your overall health. And he encouraged me to also reach out to Dr. Lorenzo Cohen, who was the director of integrative medicine. And so Lorenzo and I actually struck up a friendship, and I shared with him how guys were coming up to me that were in their 20s and 30s and asking, should I get a PSA? And I said, what should I tell them? And Lorenzo said, the best thing you can tell younger guys is they need to really focus on their lifestyle habits. And so that began this, I decided, how can I use this, my story and my experiences to reach men with this message of lifestyle interventions? Because I was reading a lot of research at the time. I was reading about Dean Ornish's work on prostate cancer. And I just felt like nothing that I was finding at the time was, from any other organization was what I was hearing from Dr. Katz about how lifestyle, or from Dr. Mendelsohn, or from Dr. Cohen, from Dr. Ornish, how lifestyle can make a huge impact on the progression of the disease. And again, a lot of younger guys, I was looking at the data, a lot of guys at the time and to this day, overweight and obese. And at the time of my diagnosis, I was also, I was 40 pounds heavier. A few years before that, my diet had been up and down. I had been yo-yoing. A few years before that, I was what you would call clinically obese. I wasn't like huge, but my body fat percentage was high. So it was all tied together. And I decided at the time, the best thing I can do is I want to start a nonprofit to get this message out there about lifestyle interventions and active surveillance, active holistic surveillance, and reaching younger men. So when I was reading Dr. Katz's book, he was talking about how you can beat prostate cancer through lifestyle. And he was specifically referring to early stage disease. So I decided that year, when I was sharing my journey with my friends and people that I was meeting along the way, I started a Facebook page called facebook.com/beat prostate cancer. And it started catching on. Like that first year, I think it had 8,000 people. And I think because of the anonymity, or people felt more comfortable to share their experiences behind a screen and not as embarrassed, because I didn't really feel comfortable going to an in-person support group that, immediately. But people would, there were a lot of women that were sharing how their husbands had their prostates removed, and some would message me that their husbands were going through depression, suicidal, just some really sad stories. And what I would do is, if someone would publicly post something about a mental health experience, I would reshare their post, and it would garner like sometimes 100, 200 comments. And that became like this little support forum, that Facebook page. So I decided to start the blue side of what I thought was, okay, women are pink, guys will be blue. Let's do this blue cure. And I kicked off an event. A friend of mine decided she's a philanthropist in Houston, and decided to hold this big event at this department store in Houston called Neiman Marcus. She said, just show up and share your story. And so I did, and there were about 300 people that attended. and it was a big, men's fashion show, and it was all about, encouraging guys that are younger to pay attention to their bodies and to go get a checkup, but to know that a younger guy can get prostate cancer. But I noticed at that event, there were about 80% of the attendees were women. And I noticed that in my, in the social media, that a lot of females, a lot of wives, a lot of daughters were doing the posts. And that would really stick with me. And so when I decided to launch Blue Cure, I was really fortunate that my friend was good friends with Fran Drescher, who played the nanny on television. And Fran decided to take a picture wearing a Blue Cure t-shirt, and she sent it to me, and I posted that. And and she also shared it with her huge female following for her cancer organization called Cancer Schmancer. And so she was saying, hey, this younger guy was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He's trying to raise awareness to all the dads and granddads out there, but also to get the message out there to younger guys. And then my friend also knew Roger Moore, who played James Bond, who had gone through prostate cancer. And he took a picture wearing a Blue Cure t-shirt. And the comedian Bob Saget, Bob and Roger Moore are no longer with us, but he also took a picture wearing a Blue Cure t-shirt. So I knew, being a marketing and PR guy, that with those high profile people, I could get some media attention. And so I used that. I used that to open some doors and get on, Fox News did a story. I was on, media in New York and LA, different parts of the country. I started doing television and national radio shows just to get this message out there, because I felt like it was so important to, I just didn't feel like there was that health literacy was so low on this. And I remember speaking to a friend of mine who is a publicist. She's a huge publicist in New York City. And she planted this seed when I told her what I was doing with this new organization. And she says, do it, speak. I want you to go with this message in a way that is organic and not be beholden to drug companies. And I said, what do you mean? And then she says, don't take money from certain entities, like big pharma. And she wasn't saying like big pharma is evil, but she was saying that would detract, that would take away from the message that I was really focused on. So back then, when I started Blue Cure, that was part of what I set out to do was, I'm going to try to be really pure and not take money from these entities, from big food, from alcohol companies, from big pharma. I just want to really focus on this lifestyle message and to get men to get checkups and to discuss cancer screenings. And that was, later on, I would realize how challenging that is to try to grow a nonprofit organization when you're not taking money from all these entities. It's incredibly hard. So that's where I was. And then another documentary that really got me at the time in 2011 was Forks Over Knives. If you guys ever have a chance to watch that, I would watch that. That also had that continued to, it was one more thing after another that was just lighting this fire under me, because I was completely changing my diet and my lifestyle from where it was before. And so I was, at the time, I had gone from black to white. After Dr. Aaron Katz, you have a real type A personality. So I was like, I'm going to go all in. And, he's encouraging me to eat a certain way. And so I gave up the red meat. I gave up the dairy. I hadn't eaten I wasn't a vegetable eater, but every day I was eating a ton of salads. I was juicing a lot of cruciferous vegetables. And I went out to, about a year later, I went to the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda. And that was the 5th place that I had gone. So I'd gone to Baylor, Baylor, MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Columbia Presbyterian, and this is the National Cancer Institute. And I saw Peter Pinto. And so they did a biopsy, and I got a call a week later, and I was so worried because my PSA had gone up. But on repeat biopsy, they didn't find anything. And I said, so does that mean that I didn't have cancer? He said, no, I can't say that. But what immediately hit me was, wait a second, what about what Aaron Katz was saying, what Dr. Katz was saying, that sometimes on repeat biopsy, some of these people who make these lifestyle changes, they don't show cancer present again when they get that biopsy. So I asked Dr. Pinto about that. He said, well, I don't want to say that. He said, but what I would say is keep doing what you're doing and keep living life, because it was consuming me at that point. You know, I just kept thinking I've got a ticking time bomb inside of me. But so that's what I did, was I really continued to focus on the diet and the lifestyle interventions. And from there, I met Margaret Cuomo. She had written a book at the time called A World Without Cancer. And I remember reading how she talked about how these endocrine disrupting chemicals that are in our body care products, that are in everyday products, she believed were linked to a rise in prostate and breast cancer. So that was just one more thing. And I flew up to see her, and I was really interested in her research and what she was putting out there. And for me, it was really important to share that with the Blue Cure community. So she became the first speaker that I brought down to for the Blue Cure lecture series. So I had Margaret Cuomo, and then I had John Mackey, who was the founder of Whole Foods, Dean Ornish, and Aaron Brockovich. And so at the time, even though my story was that of prostate cancer, and I'm trying to get men to really pay attention to that, I knew then that by the time we're talking about prostates and prostate cancer, it might be too late. So the focus started really on your overall health, a holistic approach, and to get guys getting a checkup at a younger age. And as guys are getting those checkups, to discuss their family history, to discuss their lifestyle factors, and to discuss that PSA. And that's what Blue Cure, that was really early on. I was focused on addressing lifestyle factors for overall health. But again, using my story and my experiences to really get guys to think about their prostate cancer journey differently. And so, and then in 2013, I gave a TED talk, and it was focused on, my story, but encouraging men to be more proactive in their health. Again, when you're talking to guys that are in their 20s and their 30s, it is such a challenge to even get prostates on their radar. So that's why I started really tackling that as thinking about just getting their checkup, because most young guys don't even get a checkup. Most men don't. The data is all over the place, but I've read a lot of data that it's about half of men aren't getting their annual checkups. So I have tried different and unique ways to get this message out there. Even back in 2012, I started a series of AAU basketball across the state of Texas in 7 cities, and youth camps, all targeting younger men to get their dads and their grandfathers to be more proactive. That was always the goal, is to find unique ways of getting dads and granddads into the doctor's office. But then you realize, you don't have a whole bunch of resources, so you really want to focus on what you can to get men to, get checked. So my story is one in which it's become my life's work to get men to really think about the way that they're living. And one of the things that really drives me is, my diagnosis. I've lived with it now for 14 years. And I have to look at that as a way that, today I am healthier at 49 than I was at age 35. So much healthier. I don't want to be like my father, who is 75, who takes 16 prescription pills a day, who every day when I call him in the morning, I don't know if he's going to take my call because he has passed away overnight. He breathes heavy. He's just in absolutely terrible health. And we have a family history of everyone on my dad's side that died from a lifestyle-driven chronic disease. So much of my work through Blue Cure all across the country, as I've traveled across the country, has really been to get men to focus on their lifestyle habits. And I've gotten so much pushback, and it's not a message where I'm trying to wag a finger in anyone's face. I'm just sharing my story, but also, we have to acknowledge that the way we live, it plays a huge role in how we our last years on this earth. And so I'd rather have one in which it's vitality, and it's not one where I'm struggling every day and breathing hard. So I hope that in some way, my story is one in which encourages others to make changes. Small, sustainable changes can make a huge difference in your life. And Blue Cure recently launched a men's health podcast. It's a short form podcast, it's about 15 to 20 minutes, where I've had leading experts in lifestyle medicine who I know that your organization has also had some of your webinar speakers. But we do know that exercise and diet can play such a huge role in improving outcomes and responding to prostate cancer treatment for men that are on active surveillance to slow the progression of the disease. But then again, to also reduce your risk of dementia and heart attack and stroke. It's all connected. So that's about all I have. And I hope that you can encourage the younger men in your life, your sons and your grandsons, to get their checkups. And I hope in some way that I inspire you to live a little bit healthier.
Well, thanks, Gabe. Let's see here. Appreciated the inspiring words. Appreciate the work you put into this, working against the odds with the younger guys. But are there any secrets you can share about reaching these younger men in their 30s and 40s? It sounds like if you can reach their ladies, you might be able to, or I suppose I got to be fair here, they're gay partners, although I guess that doesn't make sense. What's the best way to reach these people, these young people?
I think that, so I've worked with a lot of professional athletes that have helped get the message out there. Again, my focus is on getting younger guys to just get that annual checkup and to know their numbers. Most guys they don't know about their LDL. They don't know about their blood pressure. They don't know about their body fat percentage. They don't know about their blood sugar. They don't know how lifestyle factors can move the needle with each of those numbers. And the fifth number that becomes important as you get older, at least as a baseline and then on, is your PSA. But we can't even have that conversation if guys aren't getting their checkups. Women at a younger age, they're used to going to the doctor. And so we need to get guys in the habit of going to the doctor. And I do think it's incredibly important to use social media platforms, to use whatever opportunity you have to share stories and to become more open about it, so that we continue to chip away at stigma that, especially with prostate cancer, which there's a fear that a lot of men have had for a long time in sharing their diagnoses and their stories related to it. But also, I think it's important just to talk about health issues in general as men and not wait till it's prostate cancer. And one thing I always tell younger guys that I talk to, that are in their 20s and 30s, and the importance of getting their checkups, is it's always best to catch something early and know that you're not alone in this. There are all kinds of guys that are dealing with issues, especially as the years have gone by and we've seen the overweight and the obesity numbers just continue to skyrocket, which is leading to more health issues and lower productivity and all kinds of mental health issues. So that's for a long time, I think I even had one of my editors for my book tell me that she didn't like that I had so many references to overweight and obesity because some people might be offended by that. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have is we're also too afraid to offend people. It's not about being offensive. It's about being truthful about the way that we're living and how that affects our health. And so, we just have to be honest about that. It's like I had a conversation with my dad the other day because my dad is, he might have to have heart surgery. He's always got a health issue. And I've been encouraging him for years to make small modifications. But he said, listen, I don't care. I want to continue to eat my bacon every morning. I want to continue to eat my hamburgers. I want to eat my steaks. I want to eat the way I eat because I love eating that way and I don't care. But you know what? It's like yesterday, there's an ambulance at his house. They were telling me his blood pressure is sky high. There's only so much you can do. You can lead a horse to water. So I just think by continuing to share stories, and unfortunately, as many of us can attest, it takes a diagnosis sometimes to really be a wake-up call. And you wish that others could learn from your journey, from your experiences. But I've used so many creative ways over the last 14 years, from celebrities to youth camps to college outreach, which is why I think, Movember, I had lunch with a representative from Movember back in 2012, 2013. And he was telling me that it was like he loved what I was doing in my outreach, but he said, that's why we don't really focus on lifestyle, or this was at the time. I don't even think they still focus on diet. They do focus on exercise, like move. But when you start getting into diet, you start losing people, because that's like, people, for some organizations, it's about, hey, let's just get the donations. Let's get the donations to send it off to research, which is important. I want to be really clear. I advocate for a medical cure. I want there to be a medical cure tomorrow. But until there is one, when you're telling me that there is so much that we can do with our daily choices that can make a huge difference in our outcomes or possibly preventing the disease, that's huge. That is absolutely huge. But it's a big question. It's like Howard, I know I told you this a while back when I did a men's health tour in 2019 where I drove all around the country, 40 cities, and really to share my story, but to get guys to get in their doctor's offices, to get those checkups and to make lifestyle changes. I had an executive from a major pharmaceutical company call me, and she wanted to partner with Blue Cure. We ended up not partnering, but she told me that, I love your message, but at the end of the day, people in America just aren't going to do it. They're just not going to do it. That's why we have to put more hope in the innovation of pharma and pharmaceuticals. But I don't want, I understand our reality is that most Americans are dependent on drugs, but that's not the world that I want to live in, where everybody is relying on Ozempic and and blood pressure medication, LDL medication for dementia, medication for this, medication for that. And the reason why I mentioned the Dean Ornish special that was on this last Sunday before this began, CNN had a documentary called The Last Alzheimer's Patient on Sunday. And Dean Ornish, who's considered the father of lifestyle medicine, he had some research in the 90s that showed that men that were going through bypass surgery could reverse the blockage. They no longer had to have the bypass. So after my diagnosis, I read research that he had done in 2005 about men on early stage prostate cancer who did the same lifestyle interventions as the guys in the 90s with the reversing the heart disease. Dean's research he was saying you could reverse early stage prostate cancer. And so, I've actually brought Dean in to speak here in Houston, and I had visited with him in Sausalito, but he made the same point. He's got some major research that is being published in June, and just in a few weeks, on Alzheimer's. It's been a 5-year study where people that had dementia, some of them were able to reverse their dementia by making the same lifestyle changes that he did in the study with the people for heart disease and the people with early stage prostate cancer. And again, it's cutting out the red meat and the dairy. It is a healthy vegan diet. It is exercise. It is stress management. It is the same thing that you continue to see where it's across the board. It's like Dean says, there's not one set of lifestyle habits that reduces your risk or prevents you from getting this and a different set of lifestyle habits for that. It's all connected. His theory is it's the manifestation of the same underlying biological mechanisms, whether it is high LDL or high blood pressure, early stage prostate cancer. He says it's the body that is manifesting into these different diseases because underlying issues.
Maybe we
So
should get some other questions in. If you don't mind, there's a lot of people who are interested in actually, if you're willing to, if you could put your email address, I think there's some people who would like to get in touch with you. If you could put that in the chat. And thanks to Martin for adding the link for your book and your organization.
thank you. How do I add
the chat room?
Gabe Canales at gmail.com.
Oh, okay. But there are questions about sort of your history. In other words, you started out 14 years ago. What was your PSA and what was your Gleason score? And you made those changes. What is it like now?
Yeah, so I had a PSA. My PSA at the time was almost 4. It was a Gleason 3+3. My PSA recently was a 3. But you know what? My PSA has been all over the board because when I went out to the National Cancer Institute before I had that biopsy where there was there wasn't cancer detected, my PSA had gone up, or at least it showed over 10. And so I remember posting about that before I had my biopsy. And I even got a call from, he was the then head of Zero named Skip. I don't know if any of y'all knew Skip. But he was like, we're here for you. I'm really sorry. So that's what's really, I encourage, if you can, always get a second opinion, and sometimes get a third or fourth if you can. Because had I made that first choice, I wouldn't have a prostate. And had I just stuck with the second choice of active surveillance without making any other modifications in my life, I could be 40, 50 pounds heavier than I am right now. I could have high LDL. I could have high blood pressure. I could be like the other men in my family that died prematurely, that died from heart attack, that died from stroke. That's where my life was headed. I mean, I have to look back at that 35-year-old guy who just wasn't a healthy guy at all. I look back at the men in my family, in high school, in their 20s, they were all skinny. And then over time, they were overweight. And then they all got obese. And then they all died of something early. And my dad, he's still hanging on, but the quality of his life is really poor. And it's especially important here in Texas and in South Texas, the Hispanic community. I did media in San Antonio last year, the year before that. I know they hate it when I say this, but the fact is that San Antonio, 80% of the Hispanic men are overweight and obese. And we can't just look the other way and say that that's not related to disease. It absolutely is. And the sad thing is that a lot of people won't say it if they're not Hispanic because they don't want to offend people. But, I'll say it. And it's also, we have to talk about, just across the board, men in general, but then specifically culturally, the Mexican American diet, the South Texas diet is delicious, but it is absolutely bad for you. It just is, as well as the standard American diet.
Now, let me ask Bill or Jeff, are there other questions in the chat room that you want to bring up? Because I know Gabe is on a tight schedule. His mom is still young. She's turning 70 today, and he's got to get to the party.
Well, there was one question. I'll just go ahead and quote it here. Given that there's a movement to declassify Gleason grade 1 as cancer, it would be interesting to know if Gabe would have made positive lifestyle changes when his 3+3 was not called cancer.
Interesting.
I think it was I'll give you another example of, I had someone in my family who someone close to me who's been incredibly stressed out lately, and her blood sugar, she's pre-diabetic now. She is has high blood pressure, and she has a high LDL. And the last year and a half, she's just let herself go. Well, she had a diagnostic mammogram and she had an ultrasound, and they found something suspicious. So she started really freaking out. And I've been encouraging her for a while. You have to slow down. You have to manage your stress levels, because if you can't manage your stress levels, that's going to lead to you binge eating and eating, crappy food and not sleeping, not exercising, because she hasn't been doing any of those things. And she went and got a second opinion, another diagnostic mammogram and ultrasound, and they found nothing. But before she went and got that second opinion, she started making lifestyle changes, and she was really worried. Well, now it's back to the way of living before. And I said to her yesterday, that is so unfortunate. And I really encourage you, you've got to slow down, because you're going to have a heart attack. You're going to have a stroke. So to answer your question, I do believe that it was that diagnosis that scared the shit out of me. That diagnosis put a lot of fear in me, a lot of sleepless nights. I thought I was going to die like a few of my friends died that year. And I was just on, again, you have to, some of my clients at the time were some of the most iconic and best restaurants in Houston. And I would go and eat incredibly delicious food every day at my different clients at their restaurants. And I never even cared about, how much fat was in it or how much sodium. I just ate whatever I wanted. I didn't have any regard for that. And I would just load up on lots of energy drinks to keep me going. And, I'd proudly, exist on 3 to 4 hours, 5 hours of sleep a night, and just, energy drinks through the day, because I could just go. No, I just think that it took that to be my wake-up call for me to be healthier. And I just think it's so important for guys overall that are on active surveillance to go an active holistic surveillance route, or to have lifestyle interventions be a part of their protocol. I'm so grateful that I met Aaron Katz, and I read his book before I went up there, and all the people that I met along the way, because I just thought about the men in my family who never heard that advice from any of their physicians. Never. And I can't tell you, I have met thousands of men over the last 14 years who would say the same thing. Most of the guys that I had met that were also on active surveillance did not receive any kind of lifestyle dietary advice from their urologists. So I've been writing, I started writing for the Huffington Post back in 2011. And every time I would do media on television or radio, I would talk about this. I would say urologists and physicians need to talk to men about their dietary and lifestyle habits, because that can make a huge difference across the board on their numbers, but especially when you've been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And everything that I was told back then, because I even spoke to the head of urology for a major cancer center, and he was the president of a major cancer center had me come in and talk to the head of cancer prevention and the head of urology. And the head of urology was a very, very obese man. And I was sharing with him, as the president of the university or of the cancer center wanted me to share my story up to that point. And the head of urology just laughed and said, there's no truth to any of that about lifestyle interventions. And this was back in 2011. And it's so interesting. 14 years later, we see what Dean Ornish was talking about back in the 2005s and what Aaron Katz was talking about. Now you're hearing more and more urologists. You see Stacy Loeb publishing more research on this over the last few years and presenting it at the AUA and talking about it, about the power of plant-based diets, and Dr. Newton and others talking about the power of exercise to improve treatments and outcomes, and to prevent the disease. I mean, that's pretty powerful stuff. So we can't talk about it enough. We have to continue to talk about that. And I do think that if more younger people knew that they had that diagnosis, they might make some drastic changes. I would like to say that people are going to just, do it on their own. It's sad to say, but when you got 72% of American men now that are overweight and obese, what is it going to take for people to make change? It's unfortunately going to take a scare, because oftentimes we wake up every day, we look in the mirror and we don't think that, we think we're fine. I mean, I thought at the time that even though I recognized that I was a little sluggish, I remember doing that first interview for CBS, and I thought, even the reporter says he's a healthy guy. I mean, I thought I was healthy. I thought that my approach to diet, my Atkins diet approach back in 2010, down here we have what's called Whataburger. It's like McDonald's, but I would go for a run, and then afterwards I would get a triple meat Whataburger with cheese and take the bun off, and think that, okay, because I had 3 slices of beef with cheese and bacon, and I'm not having the carbs, that I'm eating healthy. So, yeah.
Gabe, there's a question hopefully we can squeeze in before you have to run off. An individual has asked whether you had switched from annual biopsies to PSA blood work and scans, which actually, and that would be part of whether you've had MRI scans, for example.
Yeah, so I did early on, and after I've had PSAs since every year since the last biopsy. Some would say that maybe that's irresponsible. My urologist, my primary care physicians, they know my background. They know my journey. I mean, that is something that Dr. Peter Pinto at the National Cancer Institute encouraged me to, get your PSAs. And the fact that they've been going down, and that my other numbers have also improved over the last decade. I felt like before it was ruling me, like my diagnosis was ruling me. Now, if my numbers were to start going up, I would, have to consider getting a biopsy. But everything that I have read from these experts that I've had the fortune to meet would lead me to believe that my drastic lifestyle changes have led to the slowing or the progression of the disease that I had.
Gabe, I think this is your hard stop. Are you willing to take a few more questions, or do you have to go?
I'll take 2 more questions.
Well,
yeah.
Okay.
I love doing this. I'm sorry. Shoot it.
Well, you mentioned it's been a while since a biopsy. I can tell you from my own experience, I haven't had one in 8 years, and I'm just monitored in effect by a type of PSA. I wonder, the person who raised it mentioned annual biopsies, and we certainly had those 13, 14 years ago, but it's been a long time for you, right?
Yeah.
How long since?
The last one was when I had it with Dr. Peter Pinto. When on repeat biopsy, there was no cancer that was detected. Again, he would say that's couldn't say for sure that I didn't have cancer, just because he was taking into account the biopsy that I had before that showed 1 core out of 12. And in that core, it was a very small amount. But again, it was, Gleason 3+3. Dr. Larry Lipschultz will jokingly say, the first urologist who diagnosed me, look at the monster I created. But I always tell him it was the kind of the best thing that happened for me at that time in my life, because of the changes that I made and that I slowed down. But again, if things are going the right way across the board, when you have your LDL that goes down, when you have your body fat percentage that goes down, when you have, you know, your PSA go down. I'm all, like, but who I am today and the type of I would have laughed at the guy the way that I eat today. I probably would have laughed at that guy the year before I was diagnosed or leading up to my diagnosis. I mean, I eat a lot of really healthy food. I eat a lot of vegetables throughout the day, a lot of high fiber foods. I know not everybody can do this, but about 5 or 6 times a week, I lift weights. Then I go run 3 to 5 miles. I really try to, every time I do that though, every time I'm putting something in my mouth, I'm always thinking about, am I feeding disease or am I, you know, trying to stave it off? And that's how I have to look at it, because as we all can attest, you know, time goes by like that, and before you know it, you know, it doesn't help. You know, I have a grandmother right now with late stage dementia, and I don't want to get that, you know, but I have to look at what I had on my podcast recently, Dr. John Rady, who teaches at Harvard Medical School. He wrote the book called Spark, and he says that we know that people that exercise, that move their bodies every day, and that sweat can stave off cognitive decline and dementia by 15 years. That's powerful. That is absolutely powerful stuff. And then when you have Dr. Rob Newton, who you know, Howard, in Perth, Australia, who's done a lot of research on exercise as medicine for prostate cancer, he said the same thing on the podcast recently. We know that if you engage in physical activity, but if you're really pushing yourself, that can prevent prostate cancer for some men, but it can also drastically improve outcomes for men. So that message, again, is, you know, can't be emphasized enough without making people feel like I'm beating their head over the head with a hammer. It's a message of encouragement.
Bill, I have a question, if okay, here from Dominic Fusco. He says he's a Gleason 6 with a PSA of 17.5. Prostate is very large. He says his doctor is blaming PSA on prostate size. He said he tried to get a PSMA scan, insurance would not cover it. What should I do? Gabe, if you wanted to address perhaps an enlarged prostate maybe in the mix?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that. You know,
Okay.
That's something that I would encourage a medical professional, you know, who knows his records better to address that.
Okay,
Yeah, we
thank you.
try to stay away from personal advice here.
Right.
So, Bill, any final thing for Gabe, so he can get to his mom's birthday party?
Well, I think at this point, his mom's birthday party probably takes priority over any more straggling questions we have in here. I think we've covered the majority of them.
Well, and I'd like to just say on behalf of ASPI, that was outstanding, and the work that you're doing is really wonderful, and we encourage you to keep doing that. And you are so much allied with so many of our board members. In any event, it was good for us to discover you, and great presentation, Gabe.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Howard, for making this introduction, and thank you all for what you do to make a difference in the people in your lives and to share your stories. Sharing stories is incredibly powerful. And when we're authentic and vulnerable and allow ourselves to, you know, be open and share what we've gone through, that really does, you may not hear it from others, but it will lead some men to go get that checkup, to go get that PSA test, to possibly catch something that they didn't know that they had. You know, so I encourage everyone listening to this just to really reflect on making small modifications in life that can actually make a huge difference. So I appreciate you all.
And no birthday cake for you, Gabe.
No birthday cake.